The mainstream opinion of the 2025 film Together is that it's about codependency and a loss of self. But what this film actually depicts is not about love relationships, but rather about our fear of returning to wholeness through reuniting with our divine counterpart. This film made sacred union look like horror, but the true horror is remaining divided. Together is a body horror film similar to The Substance, which is also about non-duality, merging with the self, but Together is specifically about a young couple merging. Tim and Millie have been together for about a decade, but when Millie proposes, Tim freaks out because he's afraid that marriage will mean losing his independent identity. The couple move and then go on a hike and get lost in the woods, then fall into a hole in the ground, which used to be an old church. This church was home to a cult-like New Age group that practiced merging two into one. After their trip down the hole, Tim and Millie have a growing irrepressible urge or need to be together, which leads them to physically merge their bodies. They fight to stop this, but the supernatural force bringing them together is too strong. The crux of the film is explained when Millie speaks with her principal, Jamie, who explains how Plato said we were two halves of a single being, and if you found your other half, you should hold on to it. Plato's Symposium described how Zeus feared man's power, so divided man from woman, which is actually the same story as Adam being divided from Eve in Genesis. This is the story of the separation of the divine feminine from the divine masculine, or the creation of polarity. There was a brief moment where we were shown another world in the reflection of the water inside the hole in the ground. Nothing was ever said about this, but this is symbolic of the inversion. The couple fall down the hole, which symbolizes their descent into matter, much like Alice in Wonderland falling down the rabbit hole. Alice flips upside down, and Tim also flips upside down in the watering hole. The watering hole is the mirror, or the projected reality illusion. It's Plato's cave, believing that the shadows on the wall are reality. Tim drinks from the water, symbolizing that he gets nourishment from the illusion, not from source. This also is symbolic of Narcissus falling in love with the reflection. All this means is that you are tied to the 3D illusion, believing that it's real. This is why Tim is afraid of losing his identity. The camera represents the viewer, and it takes us down into the reflection, into the water, and then stays there, holding us hostage inside the inversion. The world in which we live is inverted. I mentioned this in my video called Backwards, which is why we have the masculine energy as dominant and the feminine energy suppressed. There's a scene in which Tim says he's held hostage in the home by Millie because he doesn't have a driver's license. What this symbolizes is that he is held hostage inside the mirror reflection, trapped inside the illusion of separation or his own ego. The world of separation only exists as long as the masculine and feminine are kept apart. What Together shows well is the fight to stay together is just as powerful as the fight to be apart. The natural forces of repulsion and attraction in our world is magnetism and electricity. This duality and perpetual imbalance is what keeps the two worlds apart. This is why the physical world views union as a loss of self, and yet we can't keep from uniting with a partner in search of that divine union because it's within our nature. The concept of codependency as the basis of this film has more to do with this limited 3D perspective than what the film is actually showing. Codependency refers to two people who can't live without each other. They become one in an unhealthy way because they don't know where one begins and the other ends. This is not what happens with Tim and Millie's relationship. In fact, the opposite was what was happening. Tim was afraid to be married because he didn't want to lose himself, while Millie wanted to break up because she thought it would be harder the longer they stayed together. They were not codependent, they were experiencing this push-pull dynamic that kept them apart, yet kept them together. The underlying allegory of this film is actually about merging your inner divine masculine and divine feminine, or merging your physical self with the higher self. Tim tells Millie, "I used to worry I wouldn't remember who I was without you." This is a statement about fear of intimacy, not codependency. Millie discovers that her principal, Jamie, is one of the New Age nutters who merged with his divine counterpart, and Jamie tells her some pretty scary stuff. That it's a great gift and very few become whole. The connection is deeper than anything you could ever imagine. No more walls, shared fears, and memories. This is the hardest part, he says. You just have to push through. What awaits is the ultimate intimacy in divine flesh. The way he says it makes it sound terrifying. We have to break past that fear barrier if you want the truth. Jamie represents the inversion's spokesperson. He's already merged, but instead of radiating wholeness, he comes across as menacing. But this is deliberate because this conditions the audience to equate union with danger. But this is actually how the inversion plays tricks on you. It turns the sacred passage back into something terrifying. There's no terrifying experience to undergo. The union is natural. The only horror is the ego's fear of dissolving. The one question that you need to ask is, how do you know which voice you're listening to? The gaslighting of the mirror world or the gentle truth of source? In the end of the film, Tim finally realizes and admits that Millie makes his life better, and being without her was not a life he wanted to live. So he proposes, and he's also willing to sacrifice his life for her, but then discovers that she's bleeding profusely and he doesn't want to lose her. Tim saves Millie by merging, finally releasing his fear of losing his individuality, and Millie says that she was trying to let him go. So both of them were willing to sacrifice themselves to save the other. This symbolizes true love because this is not about codependency, but a willingness to die in order for the other to live. This is the scary alternative that Jamie was alluding to. If you do not merge, then you will live in the mirror world in separation, trapped in the ego run by fear. Merging is expansive because you are now one with the creative power of imagination or God, and this can only happen once you are willing to leave the 3D behind, their physical sacrifice or detachment. Tim asks if Millie wanted to let him go, and she says no. They are now accepting of the process of merging because the fear is gone. Not letting the ego die and not letting your higher self die is why the two merge. It's not a death of individuality or a death of the ego, but it's a merging of both. So the identity does not go away, it expands. What actually dies is fear. And this is why they both say, "I love you," and Tim says, "I do," as if they got married because this is the alchemical marriage. The couple merges, and the house, still in darkness and disarray, the internet is disconnected, and then all of a sudden it reconnects, showing their final post on social media. This kind of implies that they're both dead now because in the inversion mirror world, they kind of are. Really, they're no longer human. They have transformed into one, which is God-man. Their final social media image is of the two of them standing outside of their house with Millie holding a set of keys, and the caption is, "We took the plunge." Plunge is jumping into the unknown. The sun rises and the house is now put together, ready for her parents' visit because we have now returned to the real world. We're no longer in the horror world of inversion. This is a world of freedom. Millie opens the door in her androgyne form, at peace and whole. So this entire story is about Tim's fear of intimacy and union, not just with his divine counterpart in the physical world, or Millie, but also union with his higher self. The ego is terrified of annihilation. If you merge, you'll die. The ego created this illusion, the water world, or the mirror of fear, to scare you off from merging with your higher self. Union with your divine counterpart and higher self isn't annihilation, it's liberation. It's true freedom. The horror is living forever in the mirror world of fear. Because when you take the plunge, you find yourself back home in the real world you've been searching for all along.